Recording in progress.
Okay, good evening. It is 6:30. We have a quorum. We'll call the planning board meeting to order. This meeting is being recorded, and those in attendance for the planning board are Joseph Rodnick, myself, Jim Maximowski, Bill Dwyer, Mark Dunn, and Matt Waldrop. And first up for general information, Mr. Dwyer.
Mr. Iser.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I'm here. I submitted an A&R plan for discussion on Friday. I hope you received it.
Yes, we did.
Good. So this is the Babb property on the corner of North Maple Street and Rocky Hill Road. The main focus this evening is what I'm calling Lot 1. They're going to cut out the existing house and barn from the rest of the property. And I think they're going to rehab the house, and I don't know what they're going to do with it, but they're going to rehab it. Anyhow, the lot has more than 200 feet of frontage, more than 40,000 square feet. The 150-foot square fits in. There are no setback violations. The barn is 16 feet off the back line, and I see that I didn't show that, but I will add that before I get the plan signed so that there's evidence that we're not violating zoning.
You ask us to approve Lot 2 as well.
Well, it's there, so I mean, again, that's more than enough frontage on 2 streets, more than enough area. So it just happened to be the remainder. We're going to show it all that way when the time comes for the over 55 community. If it ever gets put in there, we'll have all the boundary lines for that squared away.
You need to add the setback for the barn, and you need to add a signature block for the planning board.
Oh, that would be very helpful. Okay, I will do that. If you're going to be that picky, Mr. Dwyer, I will take care of it. And thank you for catching it.
I'll make a motion to approve signature of this A&R.
Second. I would second that. Or Joe got it.
All right, you said the Bill, Joe's got it. That's fine. Whatever, Joe or Mark. Motion made and seconded. Any other discussion, comments or questions? Hearing none. All in favor? Roll call vote.
Dunn, aye.
Dwyer, aye.
Maximowski, aye.
Waldrop, aye.
Zagradnik, aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay, Jimmy, I'll catch up with you at some point in the next several days. That's all I have for
Okay.
business.
Okay. And the A&R form, yep.
Yeah, I'll get you the Form A and the plan, and we'll take care of it from there.
Very good.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And next up is Christina Moreau.
Okay, I unmuted myself. So I'm here on behalf of Peter's Nails. They have currently a box sign on the front of their store, and hold on. They currently have a box sign on their store, and they are going to change that box sign to some halo lit channel letters to upgrade it. And they're just asking to have the 16-inch Peter's Nails sign on the front of their building.
So can you share your screen, or do you need me to share mine?
I think I need you because I'm on the iPad. I couldn't grab the Zoom on my computer. So if you could share yours, that would be helpful.
Okay, there were 2 attachments I saw.
One was from just the landlord approving it, Key Point.
Okay,
So that's more or less for when I filed the permit, I believe. The first one is probably a drawing.
okay.
Nick Moore being asked by the landlord to change to channel letters because they want everybody to have channel letters versus box signs on the front of their building.
Okay, let me bring it up then. Here we go.
Yeah, that's the one. So to the left is what's existing and to the right is the new proposed.
Okay. That's halo lit?
Halo lit.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, it says, okay. It's roughly about 19 square foot sign, give or take a little bit. So certainly within the 40 square feet allowed. Any questions or comments from anybody? Pretty straightforward.
Jim, what was your calculation of this?
Oh, less than under 19 square feet. 18.6 like 18.6 or something,
Yeah, that's correct.
less than 19. Well within the limit.
I'll do a motion to approve as shown.
I would second that.
Motion second. Any other discussion or questions? Hearing none, roll call vote.
Dunn, aye.
Wire I.
Maximowski, aye.
Waldrop, aye.
Zagradnik, aye.
Motion is unanimous and passes. Very good. Good luck.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Have a nice evening.
Good night.
Night.
Mr. Reedy.
The only one I'm not connecting directly with a presentation is Molly Keegan, who is probably here to see what we're doing. Unless you have something specific.
Nope, I'm just here to listen to the conversation about the Parmers.
Okay. Mr. Reedy was late, so he doesn't get any chance tonight.
I wanted to see, I had sent the Adair Place lot release. I
Oh, yeah.
don't know if we could just cover that probably quickly. I think if you recall, I want to say last year you released all but one lot, lot 10. And so town meeting voted to take over, to authorize the town to take over the roadway. And so Paul Benjamin was just looking for the release of that final lot, which was lot 10. So that's what I sent along, the certificate of performance, specifically identifying lot 10, and then also making it clear that all lots have been released from that covenant.
For everybody's reference, I'm sure everybody remembers what Adair Place was accepted as a town way at the last special town meeting in November.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to release lot 10.
I will second.
Motion a second. Any other comments? Hearing none, all in favor, roll call vote.
Dunn, aye.
Wire I.
Maximowski, aye.
Waldrop, aye.
Zagradnik, aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
You see, it's Mr. Dwyer as the authorized signature, that's fine. Okay.
We'll have a couple of reasons to meet, so we'll get that signed. Okay, I don't have anyone else for general information?
Okay, I believe we be into talking about the potential articles for the annual town meeting. That be your responsibility, Mr. Reedy?
I'm happy to start the conversation.
Okay, I mean, I don't know which of you or your,
Yeah, and I didn't know, why I hesitated is because I know you had sent out that email with some red lines that you had done. I don't know if we want to use that as a jumping off point, if we want to use the one I had sent as a jumping off point. Either one is,
the difference between the one that you put out and the one that I put out, no offense, but yours was so jumbled together, it took me a while to separate because of the way it was put together. The sections were intermixed with each other. And when I started to read it, it took me a bit to, if you would understand it. And when I got through, I mean, I only added one little term about the parking. But other than that, what you call it? It was really just putting things in kind of the way the format of the way an existing bylaw reads. That was the big difference between them.
sure.
Okay. I think the only thing that I put in there, almost all the red lines in there is the changes proposed by you and the Parmars. The only one that I put in there was the parking to set a minimum of one parking space per dwelling unit. Whereas before that, it was very open-ended on what you could put in there, but that was the only change I put in. Everything else is what you and the Parmars had requested or proposed. And to be honest, I think it reads pretty well.
Good. Agreed. Do you want me to share my screen and
Yeah.
we can go through it? If that's the,
Yes, that would be a good idea.
Bill, if you want to allow me to share, please.
Go ahead.
All right, so hopefully what you see is a Word document on the screen. You'll see Jim's name because he's the one that did all the work formatting it. I can make it larger if you want. I'll leave it here unless I hear otherwise. So the green, just for clarity, the black is the language that had existed in the bylaw. The green, I think, are things that Jim moved around. The blue, I think, appears to me to be edits by Jim, maybe just like grammatical, typographical.
Yeah, those are just formatting, grammar correction. I mean, I never realized how mishmashed we had put together senior housing district and capital letters, small letters, and mixed them all up. So those are just basically they mean nothing. It's just a grammar correction.
Yeah. And then the red were the ones that we had made, I want to say August of last year, I think is when we had originally submitted it. And so part of this is to take a step back because one of the other items on the planning board's agenda this evening and bigger picture is as a separate warrant article to deal with the two somewhat distinct senior housing overlay districts. The one that was most recently approved at town meeting, which I think we're calling the rural district. And then the, I'll say existing, the one that dates back to 2008, which is the senior housing overlay district. So part of what we're going to be doing is looking to change what the bylaw actually impacts. And we'll talk through it and then we'll see those areas where that impact is seen. So one of the first changes here to that end is that we're dividing the senior housing overlay district into the senior housing rural overlay district as delineated on the Hadley zoning map. All provisions of the senior housing overlay district shall apply to the senior housing rural overlay unless specifically stated otherwise. So it's, you take the bylaw as it exists currently and apply that to the rural. There will be some areas where we say, well, hold on a second. We want to do a couple things, but we don't want to apply to that rural district. And so in those instances, it's specifically called out. So that's the first piece, which, especially given what happened in November, seems to make a lot of sense. We'll scroll down. Again, these are all the uses allowed by special permit: single family, duplex, triplex, quadruplet or four family, congregate care, assisted living, accessory. And then these, again, these existed. There was no change there. Just got your standards. One of the standards that we didn't specifically identify, but we'd like to talk about now is this. It's not letting me see if I can do this. Highlight. Okay. Anyway, it's right here. So one dwelling unit per 7,260 square feet. And so this is what we've termed as the density requirement, where the number of dwelling units and bedrooms permitted, the maximum number of dwelling units and bedrooms permitted in the senior housing development shall not exceed one dwelling per 7,260, 14 bedrooms per acre, and then we get into TDR. The only comment here is, and we're not asking for a specific change to a specific number, it's more of a suggestion for the planning board, where you may find a site or a circumstance where allowing, let's say, increased density or density which doesn't specifically follow this 1 per 7,260 square foot calculation is warranted based upon whether it's infrastructure, like the first of all, the site makes sense where it is, the location of the building makes sense, the density in that area would make sense, and the infrastructure, the town infrastructure, would support it. In those instances, the town may want to allow additional units, even though it doesn't strictly comply with this 1 per 7,260. And so the suggestion here would be to add in some discretionary waiver provision that allows the planning board in those circumstances to waive this requirement to allow increased density. So again, not saying 5,000 square feet, 4,000 square feet, 2,500 square feet. Like a lot of other towns do that, like Amherst, by way of example, in different zoning districts have additional lot area per family where they say, you know, you need this for the first and then this for every additional. Instead of putting in some hard and fast number, the suggestion is maybe add some waiver language. And so we didn't put that in yet, but that's, if there's another iteration, which we expect, that'd be one of the things we'd look to include.
So you don't really have a number in mind for that. You're just saying to consider allowing something.
Yeah, because I think, you know, we could go through iterations where we determine what the square footage is on potentially available lots and how many units you could potentially get if it was 4,000 square feet. But I don't know that that's good for anybody. And it just seems to us to be better to allow that discretion, right? Who knows the town better than the planning board? And knowing like this site that we're talking about for the Parmers, maybe you say, geez, we don't want just 45 units, we want 65 units, right? So there may be an opportunity to do that. And there might be another one where you want to keep it at 7,260. And so instead of putting some specific number in there, it is leaving it open-ended, but you know, there's a lot of conversations that happen during this over 55 process where the applicant has to come before you. And I think those conversations about, you know, hey, look, why don't we do 6,000 per unit, 6,000 square feet per unit? Because that gets us, you know, 50 units here. And we think it makes sense because here's a design, it's tucked back, there's sufficient parking, et cetera. So again, without coming up with a strict number, because that could probably handcuff the board and maybe an applicant unnecessarily, and that doesn't promote good development. This would kind of put the faith in the planning board to make the right decision in those right circumstances.
I see your point, Tom, that there's a lot of complicated factors based on location and environment and existing conditions. But if we don't codify it and we just make waivers where it works for us, doesn't that really open us up to, lawsuits that were arbitrary and capricious?
I'd say two answers to that. I'd say no, because I would assume that the reasons you're going to allow in one and not in another are going to be pretty well defined. And so that would remove it from that arbitrariness. To even go a step further, to not even put you in that position, we could include, like we've done for other provisions in here and what I've seen in other towns, is where you can give some parameters, like upon a showing of sufficient infrastructure, being out of, being in concert with what the site can handle. Like we can put guidance in there either way, right? So if you were to say, show us from DPW that there's sufficient sewer capacity or water capacity or utility capacity to handle these many units. And if they can't do it, you can say, sorry, we're going with the 7260. So I think we can build in, and we wanted to just introduce this concept, and if it, gains some traction, we can fine tune it. But we wanted to at least identify the waiver, and then we can talk about what those parameters are to give some guidance to probably protect you, to remove it even further from being an arbitrary decision.
Well, I think Mark was on the right trail, and I was thinking about the same direction, that a very persuasive attorney or presenter is going to try to push that agenda on us and be very persuasive in some cases. But if it's not available, then we don't have to argue with you.
How am I supposed to make my money, Joe?
I totally agree.
Where did 7260 come from in the first place?
That was part of the original bylaw. That's a good question.
You're right, Bill.
Yeah, I just tried to do some math to see if it was something like a fifth of an acre or something, but it doesn't come out to any fraction of an acre.
It looks like 6 per acre, Bill. If I do 43,560 divided by 7260, I get 6.
6 per acre, okay.
6 per acre seems like.
Which
is
Half a dozen.
kind of random if you're talking about also having a limitation of 14 bedrooms per acre.
So it's something at least should be at 7 units, right? Because if you can only have 2 per unit, 2 bedrooms per unit, and you're allowing 14, but then you're only allowing 6 units,
Yeah, Tom, I was going to say, when we were working on the concept, it's actually impossible to get 14 units per acre because of that provision about the units per acre and the fact that you can't have more than 2 bedrooms in a unit for the senior housing.
Yeah, I mean, honestly can't remember where we got 6 dwelling units per acre when the bylaw was drawn up. Pioneer Valley Planning Commission helped us a lot putting this bylaw together.
So it probably reflects something that was in an existing bylaw that was
Someplace else.
adapted.
Blame it on Tim.
Yeah, because the 14 bedrooms per acre,
Larry.
I mean, the way this is worded, it's 1 dwelling unit per 7260, but then it limits 14 bedrooms per acre. It's like It's almost like a conflict of one to the other. I mean,
That's what we
Yeah.
found when we were trying to work this stuff out. Trying to apply a conceptual project to this
yeah, that,
language.
when this bylaw was adopted, we had no clue, and I'll be straight out honest on this, on what this was going to do for the town. So to say we were being conservative would be an understatement. Now that we have a little bit of experience, we can probably address a couple of these and make them more reasonable because we have seen something, and it's, you know, a little bit of knowledge and experience goes a long way here.
And we can pick a number, right? I don't want to say we just want to grant you the ability to waive anything. If there's a number that makes sense, by all means, there can be a number there.
Right. I fully agree with that. And that's the whole idea here is what makes sense. Do we need both of these statements? Do we need 27,531 and 27,532? Or should we just have one of them?
And if you have the second one, that gives more flexibility, I'd say, to a developer to decide whether or not they want 1-bedroom units or 2-bedroom units. Right? Because when you're saying 1 dwelling unit per X, that's their calculation. If you say 14 bedrooms per acre, well, they could have, 4 2-bedrooms and then the balance be 1-bedrooms if they wanted to. It gives them a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the questions is that the right number?
Well, that's where I'm coming from. Now that we have, like I said, we have a little bit of experience, I think we should have one of these two, but not necessarily both. I don't know which one is the better one. That's going to take a little bit of contemplating, for lack of a better term. But that's only my opinion. I'm not sure how the rest of the board feels.
Recording in progress.
Well, let's see. Jim, you were discussing the outline. How big is this territory going to be?
How big is what?
Where the potential housing is going to be? You said you had lines drawn signifying the extent of the buildability of.
No, I do. No. I do not have anything on buildability. We only have the district that this would apply to. This will apply to the.
Go ahead.
This bylaw will apply to the original senior housing district, which was from the bridge, Coolidge Bridge, to the bike path on both sides of Route 9 for the original business zone. This is the village overlay district.
So that's not changing.
That is correct.
Okay, I've got one question, and it was brought up by Tom when he started talking about the infrastructure. Obviously, we know that we have a difficulty with water supply. And if we have the bad property and then we extend some additional parcels of property on Route 9, we're going to have a serious water problem because every summer we have a water ban. So that's an indication that we don't have sufficient water supply for what our housing infrastructure is now. That's number one. Number two, the program, well, first of all, on the bad property, the DPW from Amherst wanted to come in, and then there was the group that was building dormitories, I want to say Archipelago, and they were concerned about the sewer capacity of the town, such that they were going to hook up to the Amherst sewer capacity because they felt that ours was not sufficient. So I think we have to make sure we do our homework. Do we have enough water supply for these both projects, or there will be other projects coming along too? So do we have enough water capacity? Do we have enough sewer capacity?
That's a good point, Joe. But I think that's gonna come down to the first project comes in, it's approved. We have capacity, sewer and water. Another project comes in and they apply only to find out we don't have sewer and or water capacity. Therefore, basically, they can't build. So it could be zoned for it, but there's no guarantee that they can do it.
Well, that's not necessarily true, because Northampton and Amherst, Paparazzo, when he was building, says that if it's allowed in a district and he was suing the town, says, well, then it's the town's responsibility to offer a sewer or water. And it ends up into a legal concern. So
I'm not aware of
we want to make sure we have sufficient supply and before we put the cart before the horse.
If I could go off in a different angle. I mean, I don't have one drawn up in my head, but I could envision taking that village overlay district or senior housing district, and breaking it into almost zones based on where it lends itself to infill, where it's more wide open, and put appropriate density ranges on each of those. So you could have, the original senior housing zone A, B, C, maybe D. And maybe over to the west where the bridge is, it's wide open. There really isn't any context to really, per se, to offend. Maybe you allow a higher density, and I don't know. I could see that being more defensible and seeming more intentional than just a waiver, which would be the easiest way out. My 2 cents.
Mark, are you gonna take that on, or is it something we should look at?
I don't know. Is that something PVPC could do, or if you wanted to have Berkshire or whoever your designer say, we recommend, and then we would respond to that? I mean, I don't know what the chairman and my other colleagues think, but I think that would be an advantageous way to go.
I don't see that the the current senior housing overlay, the downtown overlay, if you will, which is congruent with the senior housing overlay, which is basically congruent with the business district. It's not huge to start with. I don't know. I don't see what we'd gain by slicing and dicing it into smaller pieces.
Basically, and I mean, just doing a quick think, the only area that would be conducive to a big senior housing overlay district would be the big triangle between Route 9 and the Bay Road section where the Western Mass and the old Hadley Village Barn is, because everything else is only, well, on the north side of Route 9, some places not even 300 feet deep.
Right.
And once you get past West Street, you've got Hopkins, and everything else is, I mean, to be honest, I don't know where you could put in any significantly large senior housing project. I'm not saying it couldn't be done, but it would be, I'm not sure how easy it would be to fit. I mean, you're talking basically, you know, 2-3 acre parcel, I mean, 3 to 4 acre parcels at most would probably be the biggest one you're gonna find.
And a higher density would not override our maximum height.
Correct.
Okay.
The bylaw is specifically written to comply with the height requirement and the underlying district.
Okay.
I mean, unless they went down underground, they're only gonna be able to go 35 feet up. And with the water table in Hadley, you're not gonna go very deep.
You could have a basement swimming pool, but that's about it.
But maybe they want that, I don't know.
Well, have we delineated the floodplain? Are they going to be allowed in the floodplain area?
They're gonna comply with whatever requirements are of conservation. None of that is overridden. So if it's floodplain, they gotta comply.
So maybe while we put a pin in the density for a bit, just so that we can all noodle it, I'll keep moving. We can always come back to density. So this next one is your bylaw currently caps the maximum number of senior housing dwelling units in the town of Hadley based on a ratio. So it can't exceed currently 5% of the existing single-family residential housing units, excluding senior housing development units located in town. And so we thought it'd be good to increase that. There is the ability here, the board may waive this limitation if they find that the proposed development fulfills a critical senior housing need. But almost similar to what Mark had said, and I think maybe to identify the town's willingness to entertain folks who are coming in that want to put senior housing, increasing that. We put it at 10%. It could be 15%. It could be 20%. I don't have the email in front of me with the year-round housing units or the existing single-family residential housing units as of today. I'll get that and then figure out just kind of what 5% is, 10% is, 15%, 20%, and then we can present that back to you to see which one you're comfortable with. Part of my sense is, I think with the existing East Street Commons project, if you want BAB and this and any others, you're gonna have to increase it. And so, like I said, I'll find out what the existing single-family residential housing units are, and then I'll give you that data, and then we can kind of back into, well, okay, if Barry's doing 50, if the Parmars are doing 50, if we want to allow another 100 somewhere, what is that number? And so that's what this change is.
So Jim, before I get off the sewer capacity, we realize we've got a water issue. So that's without question. Now the sewer capacity, who has the authority? Is it the select board is the overriding authority of the sewer?
Yeah, they're the sewer commissioners.
Okay. Now I think we should not really ask someone who works in the sewer department to make that kind of decision. I think it should come from the sewer commissioners themselves, so we can have a bona fide statistic on that. So I don't know, Jim, can you would you appear before the select board or ask them?
Yes, I mean, is Molly still on this?
She is.
Yep, I'm still here.
Molly, do you have any idea what, I mean, I don't want to put you on a spot. If you don't know, just say it. So, but I'm not looking for a hard answer. But do you have any idea where we stand on water and sewer capacity?
Yeah, so, and again, I mean, I think you want concrete numbers, which I'll get from, Scott McCarthy. So I'm happy, you don't need to come in front of us. I'm happy to take this back after tonight's meeting, to get you better information. But, you know, our understanding has been, all along that the water supply is there. Of course, we've got the projects going on with the wells, and the like, but when Scott was originally approached about these projects, he didn't seem to think that there was a water issue. Joe's right. I mean, during the summer months, you know, we can have drought conditions and the like, and the bans go into place. On the sewer side, that was where we've always had a little bit more concern, and that's why we're in conversation with the town of Amherst, relative to seeing if we can do something on a more regional basis, because they have a fair amount of excess capacity, and that project is still alive and underway.
Yeah.
Well, bringing this up with the town of Amherst, I thought that was still supposed to be relatively quiet in that, but that was the point I was going to bring up. But I think
Just a comment on the water to everybody, that a few years ago, Hadley didn't have a lot of water to spare. That's a fact. However, the current, let's put it, the DPW department has addressed some major leaks in the system. Some of them were leaking 25 and 50,000 gallons a day. Those have been addressed. And so Hadley doesn't necessarily have any more water output, but the potential availability because of addressing leaks has changed somewhat. So maybe that's another thing to be aware of for everybody, that we are only allowed to pump so many gallons a day. But if you were leaking, 100,000 gallons a day to the river, well, that 100,000, I'm just using a number. Don't take that as fact. But if that 100,000 gallons a day has been corrected, that's more available capacity for townspeople. That's what it comes down to. Okay, so I mean, that's, I think, where the DPW may be coming from, that we have adequate water, only because they've done a good job of leak repair.
Scott also related to me that the current water restrictions are based on some regulatory changes from the state and not based on any significant changes on our supply or demand.
does it make a difference?
Okay.
Does it?
I spoke with Scott a couple months ago. I want to say it was in the fall, talking about capacity relative to the smart growth. And I don't have my notes in front of me, but I thought so I could be wrong. Don't put this in the Gazette, but I thought he said that the sewer was somewhere in the 70% capacity range, and that there were sections of town that had plenty of capacity, and there were some areas where the infrastructure pipes were more limiting. But that the overall system, I thought he said, was not in jeopardy at this point.
Well, I heard this, the number was 80 to 85%, so it's a variable number depending on who you talk to. You're right.
Let's get the facts and go from there.
Yeah, we'll send that to, we'll get the information from Scott, and we'll send whatever information we can get to your planning email address, so Bill can circulate that too.
Perfect, thank you.
Sure.
And one other point I'd like to make is the fact that we are taking potentially commercial development, industrial development, especially commercial development, out of commercial development and kind of favoring it to be residential. But and we were talking about the fact that what could bring a little bit more revenue to the town. But I went to the assessor's office and we're talking about the revenue that various things bring in. Let's just say I'll just read it off so there won't be any mistake. Okay, each type of property requires, let's say if $1 is paid in for real estate taxes, and for example, for industrial, for every $1 they pay in, they only demand 40 cents of town services. In a residential area, for every $1 they pay in, they demand $1.11 in services. And farmland only demands 37 cents of that dollar. So this is not going to be as much of a win-win from a financial point of view as we think it may be. So we have to keep that in mind as well. So
Well, that may be true, but residential is considering that you have some children. This is going to be,
well, I didn't bring up any of the statistics, and there are a lot of them involved, and that's a whole evening discussions that I don't want to start.
it's,
I just want to bring this.
Mr. Reed, could you continue?
Happily. Okay, so we were just talking about the percentage, which I'll get you. The next change is down here. So as you know, the maximum number of dwelling units per building is currently 4 dwelling units. So you can have a building and all it can have in it is 4 dwelling units. This change is where no building shall contain greater than 50 dwelling units, except in the senior housing rural overlay district. It's still no greater than 4 dwelling units. And so the base district, 50, the BAB property in that area, no more than 4. So you can have single family, 2 family, 3 family, or 4 family there. In the base senior housing overlay district, you can have those, but you could also have any number between 4 and 50, which is somewhat precisely what we're looking to do for the Harmars in their project. And in that same vein, when we look at the distribution of dwelling unit types, specifically in the senior housing rural overlay district, no more than 50% of any of the units shall be 4 family, and at least 10% shall be single or 2 family. That or those restrictions for minimums and maximums don't exist in the base senior housing overlay district. So this would just deal with that newly created rural overlay district. Of parking, 2 spaces per dwelling unit, unless reduced by the planning board upon a showing of alternative transportation access. You're thinking PVTA, bus routes or ride sharing or some other use. And then this is Jim's addition, but not less than 1 space per dwelling unit. So if you have 50 dwelling units, you need at least 50 spaces.
It's not enough.
Respectfully, I'd suggest that's the developer's decision based on marketability. Right, they're the ones that are going to be building it. They're the ones that are not going to be able to fill it either through rent or ownership if they don't have sufficient parking. If they think that 50 units and 50 parking spaces are sufficient because folks are downsizing, and for every unit, husband and wife, wife and wife, single, only has 1 car, that's their risk, respectfully. Guest parking, 1 space per 4 dwelling units, unless reduced by the planning board upon a showing of um, of alternative transportation access, but not less than one space per 4 dwelling units. And so for this one, Jim, I don't, if the minimum is 1 space per dwelling unit, then I don't know that we, because what you're saying here is we're saying 1 space per dwelling unit unless it's waived, unless reduced, but then you're saying, but not less than 1. For 4 dwelling units. If it was like, but not less than 1 space per 6 or 1 space per 8, I could, in this point right here, I think that would be fine. But here, I think we're just re-articulating the standard that we've sought to waive, but then not giving any relief for it. Right now, it's like 0.25%, so 0.25 for every unit. And we're saying, well, it could be reduced, and then we're saying, but it can't be reduced beyond 0.25 per unit. So right, we would need to say like, 1/8 per unit or 1/6.
Yeah, what is written is not what I intended right there.
Okay.
I was reading that incorrectly. Yeah, that should be a bit more lenient. Okay. I'll look at that.
Okay. I'll scroll down here to our next change. Project maintenance in a senior housing development, there shall be, it reads right now, shall be an organization of unit owners. We wanted to allow for a management company, so that in the event of a rental, where you could have a management company who would be in charge of the project maintenance. So that's what this provision does. It says, in a senior housing development, there shall be a management company in the case of rental units or an organization of essentially unit owners. So it just opens that opportunity based upon the type of ownership in the project that it is. And that's that either management company or the unit owners association are responsible for snow plowing, landscape maintenance, trash removal, utility services, etc. Because remember, in the case of like a subdivision, like what BAB is likely to be, those roads stay private, and there's the condominium association that would be responsible for it. In the Parmar scenario, if they continue to own the land and then rent all the units, that management company would be responsible for upkeep, maintenance, landscape, etc.
So, Tom, that's a very good point you brought up, and it seems reasonable because let's just say the East Street Commons, a very fine development by a fine developer, but no one is immortal, and so when a particular person who built it is no longer in charge, you're talking a new company will take over that will maintain the project because it is going to be privately owned.
Yeah, and to that point, Joe, so I don't know if folks know, but the condominium documents that we created had sunset provisions in them. And so it was like at the later to occur of the developer not owning any more units in the project or 7 years from the date of the recording of that master deed. And we hit that 7-year mark, go figure. I want to say maybe like the fall of last year. So now there are newly elected trustees, and that condo association is often running on its own, right? Barry has nothing, besides the fact that they ask him everything, he has nothing to do with the operation of that condominium association. And so I think, similarly, both because of the bylaw requirements, but also as a condition of approval, you could require that, in the instance of a rental, there is a management company who is always in charge of and kind of the first point of contact for upkeep, maintenance, etc. for that property. So in those entities are immortal.
Let's take it one step further. For example, in a bad property where you're going to have a sewer pumping station, and the sewer pumping station, after the 7 years expires, and the people are screaming and they don't want to pay for the new pumping station, does that mean the town is going to be liable?
No, because I guess a couple of things. One, there will likely be reserves. So in a condominium, properly run condominium, every month in the condo fees, you pay, you do your budget and you figure out what the costs are to actually run the condominium. And then you also build in reserves, which banks love to see, because then you don't have to do special assessments for capital improvements. Like, who's to say that in a condominium that the roof, you have an issue with the roof and you would have to replace the roof, which Hadley may know something about, right? So if you have an instance where you need that capital improvement, A, there would be reserves likely stashed away, and B, if necessary, the condominium association could do one of two things. They can borrow funds in order to fix that sewer pump, and then levy an assessment individualized for each of those unit owners to have some proportional increase over a period of time to pay down that debt service for the sewer pump. Or they say it costs $200,000. They say there's 50 units here, and they say you're each responsible for your $4,000 by the end of the year to pay, right? And those are typically the options. So I don't see in either of those scenarios where the town would be responsible to foot the bill for that sewer pump. I'll go down to open space. And so this was more really thinking about the Parmar specifically, and it was a question that Chris had asked me. And so we just wanted to make it clear. So open space required minimum 15% of the total site, which shall supersede the underlying zoning district requirement. We just wanted to make sure that it was clear that underlying zoning district, whatever that percentage is, does not, I think it might be 20%. This is paramount or supersedes that underlying zoning district requirement. And it's probably a good segue. One of the other pieces that I don't know that it's in here, it's one of the other ones we wanted to talk to you about, was the existence of basically the senior housing overlay district within the Village Center Business District, which have that 12,500 square foot footprint maximum. And whether or not that makes sense, we'd suggest it probably doesn't, but whether or not it makes sense for the senior housing district. And if it doesn't make sense, if we could also then build in either some discretion for the board to allow greater than 12,500 in certain circumstances. And again, we can talk about the 12,500 always seemed, and you know better than us, but seemed to be a massing and a visual concern. And so if we want to put parameters like we did with the parking, right? So for parking, we said, if there's alternative means of transportation, well, let's take that into consideration. If we can design, even though it's 14,000 square feet, but we've designed it in a way to reduce the massing or the feel of the building, maybe we shouldn't have to comply with that 12,500 square feet. And so that this senior housing district bylaw would supersede that underlying zoning requirement. And so that was one of the other pieces we wanted to talk about and to get a sense from the board of what they're thinking on that.
What section are you in for that?
Nowhere.
Okay.
So it was just a topic of conversation given previous conversations we've had to talk about the 12,500 square foot maximum footprint in the zoning district, in the underlying zoning district.
Okay.
And so we're just thinking about, as we're talking about having the senior housing overlay supersede underlying, that was kind of the opportunity to say, well, geez, if it is superseding, should we also extend that to the building footprint of the 12,500 maximum?
Yeah, just for everybody's reference, the 12,500 square foot number comes upon the idea that if you have 1 acre of land, about the maximum size building you could put on that building and meet zoning between parking, open space, and building coverage. is roughly 12,500. It was just kind of rounded off to that number. It's not exactly that number, but it's close. And it was really about limiting the size of a business building in the village overlay district. At the time that that village overlay item was passed, senior housing, etc., basically didn't exist. So this is a different item than building a business type of a building.
And so then taking that a step further, maybe in the next iteration, we'll propose this bylaw superseding that underlying zoning district maximum footprint requirement. Because even if, I think your open space is 20% regularly, here it's 15%. So even then, if your justification is 12,500, that number would be different here because you could have a bigger building and still comply with open space in the senior housing overlay district.
No argument.
Okay. Okay. Next one in this, we had redlined from provided to bylaw, so I'll just read that. And I think Jim had moved it a little bit, but I want to.
I don't know why to get redlined in that one because it's redlined in mine.
Oh, okay. So procedure for issuance of a special permit for senior housing development shall be as follows. And then we added, provided, however, that the planning board may waive any requirement of this section when in the judgment of the board, such action is in the public interest and not inconsistent with the senior housing overlay bylaw. And so these are just, pre-application, conceptual plan, the requirements of what you have to show within the conceptual plan, existing resources, vertical aerial photograph, topography, delineation of rivers, lakes, ponds. There's a lot that you ask. And in some circumstances, it may not be warranted. And so we just wanted to allow the board the ability to waive procedural submission requirements. The procedure itself remains, but just what is provided as part of this, you can say, we don't want to waive it because we need to know the ridge lines in the watersheds. Or you can say, this is a flat site, we know it, we're not worried about it, you don't have to provide it. So that's the thinking with that, just to give a little bit of a relief valve for providing some of these, which may be unnecessary in certain circumstances.
Speaking as one member and one opinion only, I think the wording in that one makes sense for the application because there's a lot of stuff requested there. And Attorney Reed is right. It doesn't always make sense to put every single thing down for every site. Sometimes you don't need it. It just busy work. It could be busy work.
No, and we do that every month when Bill edits the standard, waiver or whatever it is. He goes through and that doesn't apply, that doesn't apply, that doesn't apply. And yeah, I could see that we could do that up front.
Yeah, and we do have the same waiver authority within the site plan approval bylaw.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how that one didn't get into this one myself. But anyways.
And that's it. I mean, we don't have any other, all these are the changes that Jim had made. But those are the extent of our proposed changes to the bylaw. And I think the only kind of the open items, obviously what Joe talked about with utility infrastructure, and I know that we were at the select board, Scott was there. When we talked about this project, he said he had no concern with utility capacity then, but we'll obviously follow up with Molly to make sure we get that information. Density, something we should think about, talk about what the percentage is, 10, 15, 20%. I'll get you that data. Jim's going to think about the not less than for guest parking. And then we'll propose maybe the senior housing overlay not meeting that 12,500 square foot footprint requirement. But that's what I have for notes. I don't know if there's other comment from the board or Chris or Kishore or Shardul, Randy, Molly, anybody else.
Jim, are you working on, or going to be working on a separate article to create a definition of the rural housing overlay and the classic housing overlay?
I know you need a definition, Bill, as much as we'll just delineate the, for lack of a better term, I'm gonna call it the North Maple Street site as the rural, and this will be the regular senior housing overlay.
Okay, but are you working up something on that?
Attorney Reedy will do that.
Okay,
He'll, yeah, right, I mean, he'll, but we're not, we're working in a friendly amendment kind of a deal here. Because if he just proposes it, we could all be stuck. Whereas if it's a friendly amendment type, he can propose it, we can look at it here, and we can make the existing corrections that we're making at our public hearing, a public meeting rather, and we can come up with a workable bylaw that works for the town and for the applicant and anybody else.
I think it would be good to have that as either as a standalone, for town meeting, I think it should be a standalone article amending the current senior housing overlay.
I agree.
think it can be actually addressed within the senior housing overlay. I just think it'd be clearer to have it come up separately and apart from the technical details that we're discussing. And I'd be happy to work with you, Tom, to just get something together. I don't think it will need to be complex, but
I agree. It should be a separate item so that people clearly understand we're creating two distinct senior housing overlay districts, but the bylaw will be very similar for both.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind's eye, I see it as a, to see if the town will vote to, and I don't know if it's rename or consider. And then it depends how we define it. If we want to say North Maple, just like we defined it when it was originally passed as the rural senior housing overlay district.
But I think what we want to be sure to do is that should be an article that should come up first.
Yes.
To just create the distinction that there are going to be two sub-districts. And to some extent, that speaks to what Mark was talking about dividing up the districts a little more. But that's a cruder thing. But one article to be sure that there will be two districts, and then the second article can launch into further technical changes of the article we just amended.
And the only thing, and this is something we've got to think about, is what happens if the first one passes and the second one fails? Is there some, and this again, just beyond my expertise, is there some mechanism that a vote could rescind the first passing article, right? So if you say, okay, let's name it rural, and then you have a bylaw that defines rural and has all these restrictions, but that doesn't pass. So you've got a senior housing overlay district, but then you also have a rural overlay district that doesn't have a home in the bylaw. And so I just want to see if there's a way to undo that should the second one fail, right? And even vice versa, right? We just have to think of making sure that it is in fact consistent.
I'm not sure it'll be a problem if the second one, if the technical changes fail, we could still have the current bylaw with two sub-districts, even though the same rules would apply to both.
You may be able to, in the first article that creates the two districts, reference Article 27, Section 27 of the zone bylaw applies to both. Therefore, if the article fails, Section 27 will still apply to both.
Okay.
It will apply as amended, either way.
Yep, I think that's a good way to do it.
We could call it the East Senior Housing Overlay and the West Senior Housing Overlay.
In the previous meeting, Jim, you were fairly adamant about the affordable housing in lieu of the payment into Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So is that going to be still applicable in both areas?
It'll still be at the discretion of the planning board. However, the planning board has the authority to say, no, you're not gonna donate money, you're going to build it on site.
Well, we said that in the beginning, and they said, oh, it's impossible, it's too restrictive, we can't do it, and whine, and we said, okay.
And since then, if I remember, Mr. Roberts has agreed to do it because he says they now have some significant experience with this affordable housing, and they can do it in the ownership. This proposal by the Parmars is going to be rentals. Rentals is wholly much easier to apply affordable housing to than ownership. And we're simply going to tell the Parmars, you're going to put it on site. And I don't think they have a problem with that. I think they already said they're willing to do that. So,
Are you gonna allow the public to speak on this, Jimmy?
absolutely.
Okay, can I?
Sure.
Question for the unbiased attorney, Mr. Reedy. Joe said something about if we approve this bylaw and there is no water or sewer, and the planning board says to an applicant, you can't do it because we don't have the capacity, do they have the ability to sue the town for that?
I don't see how they would.
Okay. All right. The other thing, I hear concern about eating up business properties, and I believe that the business use as it has been in the past is going by the wayside. There seems to be less and less demand for the typical brick and mortar stuff, except for restaurants and eating and drinking facilities. So I don't see an issue with using some business property for this housing. There's a huge demand for it, as we all know, and I think that we're gonna have a bunch of varied projects in terms of ownership and rental in town that will allow a much broader spectrum of people to stay in town. The bigger the project in terms of number of units in a smaller area, if you will, is going to allow for economies of scale. Building prices would be less per unit in that situation. And one final thing I have to say is, I don't know that there would be any good reason to limit the number of senior units we have in this town. I don't think we're going to get completely overrun by them. And if we do, and they're a use that will bring in tax revenue, whereas business is not at this time, then I think it's a good thing. I got a phone call the other day from a townsperson asking me about the building over on Venture Way that the Chinese immersion school just bought, and asked me if that is any longer on the tax roll, and we all know it's not. So we just lost a big piece of property there. So we've all talked about ways to increase our tax base, and I think this is a good way to do that.
Just kind of a rebuttal, but the
No, Joe, please no rebuttal. Okay, I don't want to get into a contest of fighting one against the other here. I just want to collect information from people. We'll let them freely speak, and we can always come back to those comments at a future meeting. Okay, I don't want to subdue anybody and their comments, please. Holly.
And I just wanted to, I support everything that Randy just said, and also just speaking as a member of the Hadley Housing and Economic Development Committee. This project was certainly met with a lot of questions, but also a lot of support from our committee. And in large part, due to the demand. I mean, I think, we've heard it from the seniors loud and clear, homeownership, isn't for everybody. And I think there were a fair number of questions about this idea of having these be rentals versus, condos or the type of project that Bab Farm is going to represent. And there's a significant population of people who are looking for rental properties. And I can tell you that just from my day job. People can get to a point where owning a home really isn't financially viable for them. They need the revenue in their home. They don't necessarily want the upkeep. They love the idea of a property manager taking care of everything. So, I do think this is somewhat of a unique proposition and much needed in town. So again, I hope that carries some weight with the planning board when you're thinking through this.
Thank you. So Mr. Attorney Reedy will make a few corrections, address some of the things. I will get back to you on the one or two items that I made a note on my sheet for. I mean, as far as the guest parking spaces, maybe that's something we can briefly talk about here. Right now, it's 1 per 4 dwelling units. What, from the rest of the planning board, what makes sense? 1 per 6, 1 per 8? I don't know. What does everybody have an opinion on that one? Anybody?
I just wonder what the experience is on East Street Commons.
Oh, that's a good one.
Good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'll ask Barry and
See if he has anything out, maybe, because I honestly don't know. I mean, I think 1 per 4 might be a bit a lot, but I don't know. I don't want to get too lenient either. I mean, if it's 1 per 10, that's okay. But what's the experience over there? I don't know how many guests they have.
Barry Roberts had a focus group of elderly people who were interested in places like the East Street Common. And the first picture he showed was a 1-car garage, and then he gave a price for it. But I won't go over the whole thing. But most of the people wanted 2-car garage. So.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Joe, because on this being a rental unit, you're probably going to get a bit of a different demographics, for lack of a better term, of people. And if they understand that you may be limited, the other thing is, what's to say that within their rental agreement, they may be only limited to 1 car? That's a possibility too. So, there's a lot of things to be considered here, and I understand, because the original Barry Roberts thing was a base price of X. Well, the people there, well, I want this and this and this and this, and by the time they got through, some of those places were 2 and 3X. So, they're not going to have that option here. This is a rental. It's a lot different than a condo type ownership, and it could be to some extent limited by what is available to them. So, and you're absolutely right. There was a lot of people that looked at these places on East Street Common as, well, they really wanted a whole, I mean, they were giving up a house and they wanted basically a newer house of almost the same size. Well, that's not going to happen here, but, there's not an easy answer to this one.
Well, I think and Kishore Shardul, you don't have to answer now, but part of it is going to be a question for them of how many guest spaces do they want to have, right? If they've got 50 units, do they want 10 guest spaces? Do they want 8 guest spaces, right? Because I think it does come down, and obviously I do a lot of permitting in Amherst, and it's the same. I hate to mention the word, but it's the same, right? These are decisions of a developer where if they don't have enough and there's a demand for it, people may go somewhere else and they've just lost out on whoever's coming. Maybe they say, like you said, they can restrict it to 1 vehicle per dwelling unit. Somebody may say, that's not going to fly because I've got 2 vehicles. I can't live here. if there's enough of those people, then maybe, it's not a very good vote. I suspect there's not enough of those people. But still, to me, these are business decisions. So I don't know, Shardul, if you've got a sense of guest parking or parking.
Here, our lot is kind of different where we have a substantial amount of excess parking just with the hotel and with kind of the other buildings that are unoccupied at the moment. But I would say just as kind of a business owner who's we haven't done apartments but hotels, we definitely try to limit the amount of guests that are coming, and with the units being about 1,000 square feet, I would think that most of the other tenants would probably appreciate that there's not large gatherings and things like that happening on in the building itself. So I guess, for more about our property, we were looking to incorporate also the Hadley Farms Meeting House, that building into this. That would kind of kind of provide more parking for our use. But I guess if it was a standalone unit, I probably wouldn't have substantial guest parking. I guess that's my feeling. Just for disturbances and just not having too many people in the building. I think people who are over 55, they'd rather have peace and quiet than having people having gatherings.
And I think the comments about their property being somewhat unique is that, part of what Tom's proposing is to make this discretionary. And so just putting on my project applicant hat, one way we might address that on a project like the one that they're considering is to do a shared parking analysis, which is something that we can do and sort of estimate the peaks of the different types of uses that are on the property. And we might use that to demonstrate that there's sort of an overlap in timing of demand or a lack of overlap in timing of demand that allows a single space to be used for multiple different uses over the course of time, as part of that argument that the board should use its discretionary power to reduce that parking. And I think that is part of this. It's not that the proposal is to turn that number down. It's to allow the board to turn it down when the applicant shows that that it's reasonable to do so.
Chris, that's a point that we used to have, but occasionally an auto parts store becomes 10 years from now a restaurant. And what was sufficient for the sharing of parking before is no longer sufficient, but it complies with the regulations. So you have to be cautious.
Okay,
So everything up.
Yep. We'll turn the document back over to you, and then when I just want to make sure we're staying on the timeline. May town meeting. When does this get in front of? How do we get it in front of the public hearing? Do you want us to give it to the select board first, and then they'll give it back to you for the public hearing, just so that we know how you'd like this to go?
Right now, the PVP is still on for the first meeting in February, right, Bill?
Yes, but that probably won't be a real extensive. He's trying to finish putting together the permitting guide, and we haven't actually talked about the standard conditions for a while. So
You want to, if you can think you can make it for we got a reasonably busy agenda on the 18th, Tom. But if you want to try to make February 4th, we can do it. We talk with PVPC and review this again. So we can keep this thing moving.
That'd be great. Yeah, simple enough. We'll get you something probably this week.
Okay,
So the actual town meeting is May 1. The town, is the warrant open yet?
No,
Okay. But it will be opening
pretty soon, yeah.
pretty soon. And well, we can always just reserve a space for the planning board.
They typically need the actual wording of the article about 3 to 4 weeks ahead of time. So we have we have some time for that. As long as we have a space reserved for it, and we get the public meeting in time, we're all set, which we still have adequate time to do.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we're on the subject of town meeting. Town council had suggested some language to accommodate the Attorney General's rejection of a portion of the solar bylaw. And she made 2 suggestions, which are up on the screen, and I sent them around earlier. I think the main thing was the item 2, the removal of earth or earth removal beyond that incidental and necessary to installation of solar, which I think is what we were trying to get at in the first place. So, we don't have to jump on that tonight, but
That's almost just a plain grammar error too. I mean, correction too, in some cases. Yeah. Thank you.
So that should be not a problem.
Right.
Okay. We talked about senior density, 2 sub-districts, Attorney General.
Modify structure size limits in the business district.
Yeah, that's what you mentioned
Last meeting. To eliminate the 75,000 square foot maximum building size. What is?
I just want to say, by way of background, that was less than a 6-minute conversation in a meeting that went an hour and 43 minutes. Got a whole newspaper article on those 6 minutes, but the rest of the meeting was not covered.
Right.
Just saying.
Does the board have any opinions on that? Good idea, bad idea, forget it, go forward with it? As we all know that I don't see any big buildings being proposed. I don't know if they even would be. But this was a petition article that came forward back when it was adopted quite a few years ago. And at the time, there was all kinds of threats of the big box stores coming in, and this was under the idea of stopping them. Like we've all seen, the brick and mortar big box stores is basically not happening. We don't really have a whole lot of areas where this could be built. There are a few, don't get me wrong. But if there was a potential of something coming in that was sizable, such as this, would we be interested in it? Is what it comes down to. Potential to, get some tax money out of it. That's what it's all about, nothing else.
Well, Jim, I was in the assessor's office. Dan's kind of retiring, so I was just wishing him well in his retirement. And he brought up the 75,000. He says there's a couple of buildings that were inquiring to him that would be probably would come into town. So it's not out of the question that business is not going to be available to come in. And this was more of a conference center, hotel kind of an operation. And so,
Well, maybe we want to look at how I had heard something like that indirectly previously, that some office building was discouraged because they saw the 75,000. It never was anything that came direct. It was something that came through the prior building inspector. So I would not mind taking a look at the 75,000 square foot. I don't think there is a retail demand for that. And to the extent that there is, there will be various rental retail properties coming up over time. But to the extent that it truly limits business, other business use, wouldn't mind taking another look at it to that end.
Okay.
I'm going to suggest maybe we don't want to try to get that onto the Springtown meeting, since there's some other things that I think are more pressing.
I would be fine putting that off to the fall to give it some more thought.
Okay. That's fine. Okay, oh. The budget. Kayla had, put out a possible budget. I think Bill sent it around. And basically it's level funded, which. I think the
Yeah,
same-
so I met with the treasurer and the town administrator, and they actually recommended combining the land use budget. So combining Conservation Commission, Planning Board, and ZBA budgets into one land use budget. Let me share my screen so you can get an idea of what that would look like. But essentially, the Planning Board portion of it is level funded. It would just be some budget lines such as the legal notices would be combined with ZBA. Tuition and meetings is combined. Office supplies are combined with Concom, as well as dues. But everything else is basically the same. I think Linda just made some small changes to, shrink things down a little bit for office supplies. It's one office. Everything else is the same. I had one question, which was the planning board dues section. Are you still paying dues to any organization, or should we basically get rid of that?
The organization we used to pay dues to, I'm not even sure exists anymore.
Okay.
Now, just why do they want to combine them into one budget?
Well, this is just part of a larger effort to consolidate the land use departments. I mean, I'm also going to be moving offices, so I'm taking some, as you know, Jim, some of those planning board files with me. And it's a little redundant, especially with ZBA. I mean, with the legal notices and especially with office supplies. I mean, if I'm getting stuff for the office, it's not like I'm getting paper clips for just Concom or just planning board. I think the idea is just to make it easier, and to have it more centralized.
Yeah, but the legal notices are always, they're very unique to each group. There's never a common legal notice.
Right, but they're all serving kind of the same purpose. I mean, they're all under the land use category. And also for legal notices, it's at least ZBA frequently goes over the budget, but it's, there's always extra in some other part of the budget where it's just, I mean, you have to pay the legal notices. It's not like you can't pay it.
We all go over our budget and legal notices for the simple reason that the legal notice fees have gone up drastically in the
Yeah.
last 5 to 7 years. I mean,
Right.
more than tripled in price probably, and that's the price of everything going up. I'm not questioning that. But we bring, the planning board, I assume all of us bring in a fee to cover the legal notices that goes into the general fund. So even though our budget may be $10, our legal notices are probably a year are probably in the order of several thousand. However, we, at least the planning board, brings in fees to cover those legal notices.
Hmm.
Like planning board legal notices right now is $1,500. That's not even 3 legal notices. I mean, I've got a bill right here to pay a legal notice, and the price is $495 for one legal notice. So basically, that $1,500 covers the legal notices. However, the fee we're charging the applicant covers the legal notices, the mailings, and a small percentage to cover town fees. So they're probably going to pay $600+. So it'll cover that. I would think that the other departments do the same thing. I would hope they do.
Yeah. So are you recommending increasing the legal notice budget? I'm not sure what you're recommending.
I have requested in the past to increase the legal notice budget, and I've always been told, no, don't bother doing that because you bring in fees and all we do is transfer money out of the general fund to make up the difference. So if that's the way they want to do it, that's fine. Because we bring in fees to cover the legal notices, so I've never really pushed that idea because they says just leave it as it is. We just do transfers. Okay.
I'll speak to the treasurer about that.
Okay.
And do we have a budget for, education, continuing education?
Yeah, so that's the tuition and meetings
Looks
budget
like
line.
0.
5308.
Yes. Well, let's see. So that would be 5308. So it would be combined with the Conservation Commission's tuition and meetings budget.
Oh. Okay. Okay.
And it's basically, this is combining, I mean, my request was literally just adding up what planning board requested last year and what Conservation Commission requested last year. So it's the same dollar amount.
Okay.
Good.
I don't know if you want to increase the education, you're getting a younger demographic now on the planning board. You're not all adding up to 1,000 years of experience.
Well, that's a good point, Mark. If we're going to increase anything, I'd like to see meetings and tuitions increased.
Although if you look at the actual expenditures, for 23, we didn't spend anything out of the 500. In 24, we spent 40. Year to date, we've spent nothing. So we have the 500, we're not using the 500.
No, okay, all right.
Okay.
I have to apply to get reimbursed, I guess.
Yes, you do. Because we don't know what you're up to. Well, I guess we know what you're up to, but yeah, I don't see. I think it's fine, and
okay.
That may be something we want to talk about being a little more aggressive. Some of what we get involved with, like the Citizen Planner Training Consortium, that was a mouthful. The fees are relatively modest. But we just have to make the commitment to going.
Well, I'm hoping to retire from the blob in a couple of years, so then I'll have lots of time to go to educational. Make my head smarter.
But we could keep the budget to 1,000 for the two boards now, considering that
We're not spending it here.
Okay,
FY '24 looks like the big winner. They just almost broke 700 between the two boards. So I think that'd be fine for going forward, and if there's demand, we can as you say, Jim, we could always move it through from another line item.
that's true. You could take our big B's budget and apply it.
So I'll leave the tuition and meetings
That's really
request then.
expenditure. 24. Okay. Looks good, Tyler. Then if that's what they, I mean, if that's the reason they want to combine them, we're still getting what we've always had. It's just put into a little bit of a different pot, if you would.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so should I not request an increase for the tuition and meetings or legal notices? I'll just leave it as is.
That's my
Leave it.
opinion. But the rest of the
Okay.
board, you, from what Bill says, tuition and meeting, because we're not spending it, let's leave it where it is.
Yep.
Start to spend it, we can always get a transfer somehow. As far as the legal notices, because we cover our expense by a fee, there's never been a problem getting that, like you can see where we've spent
Right.
legal notice by the planning board. Our budget is what, 1,500. We've spent $3,200 and $3,300 the last couple of years. They cover that with the transfers because we bring in fees to cover that. So they're not taking any, we're not costing anybody any money by doing that. So we just leave it as it is. Unless they want to increase it for some reason, I would ask the treasurer and see what she thinks. But if they're good with that, and they can do the transfers, leave it at that.
Because the other part that we don't have here is the revenue side of the budget. 'Cause as you say, Jim, what we charge at least covers the direct costs of the. It doesn't cover the indirect costs. It doesn't really cover the operation of the board, the salaries and supplies, but at least we break even on the revenue side with applications and mailings.
Yeah.
Or with publications and mailings.
Well, while we're on the budget, I'm going to propose that we increase our fees. The last time we changed our fees for, site plan approval, approval not required and stuff was a few years ago. And I have learned what some of the surrounding towns charge for like approval not required. And they are up to, we charge minimum, I think it's $22.50 or something for a fee. Some of the surrounding charge upwards of 4 times that. I'm not proposing that we go to $100 or anything like that, but I think we should start, increase our fee to probably a minimum fee, maybe of $50. I'll take I will look at our fees. I will send it out to the members for a review, and maybe we can cover it at our next meeting. And that's just a matter of adopting it as a plan with a legal notice, adopting it at a planning board meeting. We don't need any town meeting approval for that.
Jimmy, just so you know, there's one town that I'm aware of that charges $50. Anybody else is 100 plus.
Okay. So I will. I won't get into what's still some of the surrounding town, but what one town charges $150 for an A&R, and the information they require on an A&R, I was like, why would they need that? But
There's a lot of planning boards like that, Jimmy, and it's crazy. You guys, you know what you need. You do it right according to the state. I got towns that want the world. I have to charge double for an A&R because all the extra garbage they want on their plans.
They want to know. They want well, I won't go into this. It's irrelevant. But I'll put out a proposal for various fee increases, what they are and what I propose we should use. And we can take a look at it, and then if we agree, we'll adopt them at a public hearing meeting with the proper notices in a newspaper. Right? See,
Budget related, if I could, and to a point that Mark raised, we were waiting to hear from Kyle as to what the what Pioneer Valley Planning Commission is already is expecting from us, how much we've already spent of the second half of our planning contract, so we know how much is available. And second, some sort of a budget from him as to how he would spend what he thinks needs to be kicked in to get to the end. So before you schedule anything more with him, I think we have to pin him down at our next meeting in 2 weeks as to where they stand and how they see this happening.
Yeah, I'd like to get the smart growth going. We've got some new members, but I haven't reached out to them because I don't know when we'll be funded again.
Well, I think you can certainly reach out and schedule a meeting with them to sort of get them up to speed on where you are. And hopefully you can do some of that without just based on collective experience. I had some information that I think I shared with you earlier. It was a slide pack, a PowerPoint, and
That was
manual from the
Matt
state.
Wishevich. Oh, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, that was in the email you sent with Matt.
The same things I sent to Matt.
Yeah.
So you could pull those out and send them to the new members just to get them started. And then I would say go ahead and schedule a meeting.
Okay.
At least one to sort of break the ice and get people limbered up. And then you can, after our meeting next in 2 weeks with PVPC, we should be able to give you a green light after that.
Okay. All right. So I'll schedule something, prepare them for working with Mr. Iser.
You're not gonna be working anymore, you're just gonna supervise?
Yeah. No, I think I'm easy to work with. You, on the other hand.
Yeah. We all know that.
couple things, regarding the budget. We would like to entertain a motion to approve the budget Kyla presented to go forward with it.
So moved.
And I will second it.
Good. Any other discussion on it? Hearing none, all in favor, roll call.
Done, aye.
Wire eye.
Samarsky, aye.
Waldrop, aye.
Roddick, aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Kayla. And next one, we do have an invoice to pay for I mentioned for the Gazette for $495.62 for the public hearing that will be held on February 18th for the read the what you call it, Headleaf
Right.
reselling of the business to a new owner, and that is to comply with the bylaw that says if a marijuana facility, retail facility is sold to a new owner, they must go through the process again. That's
What was it? Was 495 and what? How many?
495.62.
I'll make a motion to pay the Gazette 495.62.
I second.
Mark. Any other discussion? Hearing none, roll call.
Done, aye.
Wire eye.
Samarsky, aye.
Waldrop, aye.
Rodnick, aye.
Motion is unanimous and it passes. Thank you very much. Okay?
You'll email that to me? Great, thanks.
Okay, planning board procedure, bill of correspondence, bill pay bills. That's all I have. Anybody have anything else?
I have one thing. So Bill and Jim, I have the Chromebook set up. So whenever you get a chance, maybe we could schedule time next week to walk through that together.
Great. Next week or this week?
This week I'm packing up to move offices, so I think next week would be better.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, this week, I keep getting this notice from Blue Northeast about something hasn't been,
Yeah. I think the ticket is, I think they need to close the ticket, but we're all set. I think everything is set up from our side.
Okay.
I also get the emails and it's a lot of them.
I don't feel about it. I mean, it's out of my understanding to reply to them, but I don't want to make a mess. I don't want to make light of it either. Something isn't done, but if we're good, then we're good.
Yeah, I think the issue is that Jennifer is the initiator of the ticket and she's been away. This was her today was her first day back.
Okay. I thought Kayla had done everything that we needed to get done, but I didn't dare stick my nose into the emails. I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to make a mess of this thing. It seemed like it appears to be almost like a routine generation. Every 2 days we get it, or 3 days. So I says, this is not somebody mailing this out. There's some kind of an automated system.
Yeah, it's like a reminder email.
Very good at reminding.
I will make a motion to adjourn.
Go ahead, Joe, you can second it.
Yeah.
Motion and second to adjourn. All in favor, roll call.
Done, aye.
Where I.
Maximaski, aye.
Waldrop, aye.
Rodnick, aye.
Meeting is history. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kayla. Thank you, Alex. Good night. Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good night. Talk to you later.
Thanks, man.